Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 90. The Python community continually grows, with many users coming from different languages and backgrounds. This week on the show, we talk with developer Hugh Tipping about his Python journey. Hugh is also a member of the Real Python community. Hugh's background is in programming C and Perl, but started to use Python in a cybersecurity job. He explains the way he used Python to search for malware. Hugh also provides some suggestions for security packages and tools. Recently, Hugh has been working with Amazon Web Services, AWS, and using the Botto 3 library to automate services and manage authorizations with Python. We also discuss his affinity for test-driven development and the use of PyTest. Cloudsmith is a secure software supply chain management tool for your Python packages and dependencies. Try Cloudsmith for free at cloudsmith.com/sign up. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Hugh. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So Dan Bader had brought up your name to me as a member of the Real Python community, and so I reached out and wanted to know if you would want to come on the show and talk a little bit about kind of your Python experience. And as we talked before this show, I was really intrigued by kind of your journey, not only in Python, but just kind of the different areas. And it was similar to me in the sense that it's always kind of finding different ways to do programming and troubleshooting. And so I thought maybe we could start there, maybe start a little bit with kind of your background. We don't have to go all the way back, but we talked initially about you getting into Python, and what was the first places where you started using it?
Yeah, about a decade ago, prior job, I started using Python at a company that was very Perl-centric.
Okay.
There had been a lot of talk about moving things to Python for various reasons, so we can talk about that as we go along. But I was in a cybersecurity role. I was doing a lot of investigations on malware infections and other types of things. And so I wanted to do some tooling to help rid some of our Windows PCs of malware by remotely editing registries. And Python seemed the way to go because at the time, the cybersecurity community was using Python a lot. And my company did an internal class on Python. I said, let me give it a try. And once I discovered it, I really didn't feel like using Perl anymore. Perl was great for me for 12 years before that.
How were you using it, Perl, in those earlier jobs?
Well, I was doing, I did a lot of systems administration work throughout my career.
Okay.
And much of it involved troubleshooting, looking through logs. And Perl was the best at doing a lot of parsing and reporting. I mean, Perl stands for Practical Extraction and Reporting Language. So regexes and reporting templates and things like that were built right into it. You could throw a regex in the middle of a Perl statement and have it just parse data. It was really easy. So it helped a lot with troubleshooting over the years and building out usage reports and other things, and just scanning really huge logs.
Yeah. So you mentioned the company that you were working with introduced you to Python. What was it like a class or like a seminar, or how did they do that?
Yeah, they brought in an instructor to teach the class.
Okay.
And I was in the class with a lot of some of their senior developers. I felt a little intimidated. Even though I had gone to college for programming, I didn't do a lot as a full app dev. And so it was a little strange being in the class with all these really incredible application developers, but I did well in it. The teacher was good, and Python's ease of learning really lended itself to me being able to pick it up and just use it right away. So I just fell in love with it within a few days.
Had you been using any other languages before Perl?
Yeah, I had done a bit of C.
Okay.
C was a lot of my bread and butter during college when I was going for a computer science major. And so I had done a lot of C, just with a lot of open source stuff that had to be modified. And back in the early days of open source, things didn't always come with you just do a make install or a make build and it just worked. I had to do a lot of modifications of things. So I was definitely putting a lot of my C to use there.
Do you use C sometimes now also?
No.
The kind of way you can have extensions? No?
Yeah, no, I haven't used C in a very, very long time. I have thought about getting back into it so I could do extensions or libraries, but it's never really come up. There's just such a wonderful world of modules out there. I'm just grateful for all the people who put in the time to make these tools that make my life easier. So I haven't felt the need to date.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you explain kind of some of the, like you mentioned the cybersecurity job and you mentioned how it was looking at Windows machines. Were you working for doing work that was for internal stuff inside of a particular organization, or was it for other businesses?
Yeah, no, we did it. So the work that I did was sort of cross company. We would get alerts for evidence of malware. We would have to frequently either update AV, or if the AV wasn't handling that particular malware, if we had some idea what the malware did, we would have to go in and make some manual changes. When there were particular types of malware at the time that would not only inject itself, but it would also do some funky stuff with the Windows registry to make sure that it stayed around and make sure that it executed upon reboot. So
get its hooks in there.
Indeed. So one of my first Python scripts, even though I'm mostly a Unix person throughout my career, one of my first Python scripts was a Win32 script that actually remotely connected to a Windows registry. It found the particular chunk of badness that the malware had inserted into the registry, and it would remove it. And then, if we knew specifically which files were infected or what kind of junk it dropped in the file system, we would also put markers in the registry to mark those files for deletion upon reboot.
Okay.
So the Python script would take care of that in the registry. It would also actually keep a copy of that chunk, that hive from the registry, in case we screwed up any of the other software on the machine, and so we could restore it. And that was very, very helpful because we could call up an individual and say, "Hey, I need you to log out. I'm going to run this script, and then I need you to reboot." And then the malware was gone. So it was fun.
So almost all in remote, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was remote. Yeah, because we had to deal with people in remote offices. And I was fortunately granted remote administrator privileges so that I could run the script.
Nice.
With my own credentials and be able to do it. So yeah, it was pretty cool. It was I was kind of proud of myself.
Was your Perl background helpful in the sense that I think about this idea of like going through the registry and looking for specific elements and maybe regular expressions or something like that would be come in handy there, or your Perl background would come in handy as you apply it to Python?
Yeah, I mean, I learned and got pretty good at regular expressions mostly through all of my Perl work. So when I had to use the Python RE module, my challenge was only just figuring out how to use the REs in Python and not actually build the regular expression. So yeah, all the Perl experience definitely helped, and that's why when you're looking at regular expression engines, they're frequently labeled as PCRE, Perl compatible regular expressions. So
okay,
that's where that term comes. I don't know if that term is used all that much these days, but for quite some time it was.
Yeah, I don't see it as much, but that makes sense to me that you definitely want to standardize at least the majority of it. Otherwise, it starts to become kind of a moving target.
Yeah,
there's like this kind of thing with Markdown that's kind of similar that way, where like there is this sort of base standard of what Markdown is, and then there's like all these interesting offshoots of like, well, this is what we would do in science, and this is what we would do over here, and then it starts to become a little kind of crazier.
Yeah, exactly. You've got different flavors of it. Flavor for Git and a Atlassian flavor for it. Yeah, and so it gets a little off the beaten track. But I think as long as you have the base, you're good. Like even when I was helping out a Java developer with some regular expressions, I know that there were some differences there because that developer happened to know that I was good at the REs and he just asked me for a little help on something. So
yeah, cool.
Yeah, that was a challenge too.
What do you think are reasons that people, I mean, you mentioned a couple already, but what are some reasons that you think people use Python for cybersecurity?
Definitely the ease of learning.
Okay.
A lot of cybersecurity experts, and I've known some really good cybersecurity experts, they're not necessarily developers.
Yeah.
And they want to do some automation. They want to get up to speed fast on things. And in addition, there's a lot of built-in stuff. There's a lot of great modules, a lot of pre-canned stuff that they need to just import and run. Like if they wanted to do check, doing any kind of network packet sniffing or scanning or checking signatures of files or whatever, they could just do that really, really quickly and easily with Python. And plus, Python's got great debugging. Of course, it's another open source language. Open source is, security people like open source. They don't like closed source. It makes them nervous because it's hard to check, if there's vulnerabilities.
Yeah, interesting. Can you name any particular tools? I'm sure that it's a moving landscape, but like if somebody was interested in just kind of experimenting in that realm of like, okay, well, what are these things and how can they work? Just to kind of, I don't know, that's my whole thing is like, I like to dabble in some of these other practices just to kind of see what's out there and educate myself on it. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think if you want to be, especially if you want to deal with intrusion detection, and if you want to do some tooling around that area with Python, I mean, there's really good intrusion detection tools. But if you were doing something like that on your own, definitely get to understand, being able to save PCAP files, being able to listen on a network port and save PCAP stuff that can be analyzed later, or just learn how in Python to analyze it, look for specific behavior signatures, source IP addresses that you might need to block, etc.
Okay. You mentioned the term PCAP. I'm sorry, I'm not that familiar with that.
Yeah, PCAP is a format for storing network packets.
Okay.
There's a couple of formats, but PCAP is the one that I know.
Cool.
Yeah, generally that's how I save network captures.
Yeah. How long were you dabbling in that world? Or, I mean, you were working in it, not dabbling.
Yeah,
sorry.
No, I worked in, well, dabbling, it depends upon your point of view, but I was definitely doing a lot of different things in cybersecurity. I did it for about 3 years for that particular company. I haven't done much of it in recent years. It's certainly that time seeing all the just yuckiness out there on the internet and the threats that were out there. It's made me a lot more security conscious in anything that I do thereafter.
Yeah. Yeah. I would think that, I don't know. This is not a perfect analogy, but as a person who's delved into filmmaking, and, digital video and, I've been an audio engineer for a long time. I'll watch movies or listen to music in a different kind of way than like the general person, like kind of audience just enjoying something. I'll be like, oh man, what is the editor doing? or something, like very often you want the experience of something artistic like that,
right,
for all the hands that were on it, not to have left all these fingerprints everywhere.
Right.
If that makes sense. And I wonder about that with like something like cybersecurity now that you've been sort of awoken to what's possible.
Yeah, well, it definitely makes me a lot more paranoid, and it also makes me good friends with security personnel at various companies I've worked at, because security people tend to have a hard time. They tend to be considered the ones that slow down work when they're really just trying to keep a company safe. And when we've seen all the data breaches in recent years, you know that you really have to take it seriously.
Right. What's happening today is really kind of crazy. We're like large nation states are very, very involved in this kind of thing, which is
Yeah.
nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're being attacked by a nation state, I wouldn't suggest writing a Python script to check it out. I would probably go for something a little bit more commercial.
Yeah.
But it also, whether you're working in Python or anything else, it's important to keep security really at the head of your list of things. You need to be performant for sure, and you need to have your features, but security has to be in there. I mean, I don't write a lot of scripts that deal with a lot of sensitive things. I'm not running a hospital system or stuff like that. But I do still run my code through things like Bandit and safety and Docker images through Anchor to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities in there that I couldn't necessarily find myself. Now, Bandit is a tool that looks for specific coding practices that you use that might be insecure. And safety is another module that looks at all of your dependencies that you're using and sees if there's any kind of notices about them, or it'll actually even warn you if the particular module hasn't been contributed to in 6 months to a year. It might be getting a little crusty. So it'll also warn you about that. And then Anchor is for Docker images. It'll scan it and just look inside and make sure everything's looking all right. So I do these things, just because I want to show that at least I'm trying to do my part.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that whole litany of stuff, because we had a previous sponsor, Sneak,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
recently, and they make kind of nice tools in a similar way. And I was talking to data science people that when they're getting to that point of like sharing it or doing some kind of cloud, deployment of something, it's like, well, maybe you should run it through this sort of stuff and make sure that you're not missing gaping security things that you're not aware of. Because, it's hard for a tutorial to, not only are they a snapshot in time, but security is a whole other topic, and a whole other rabbit hole to kind of dive into.
Yeah.
That almost kind of needs to be done on its own. But if you're teaching someone to go and deploy, a Django application, there's this whole other subset of things that you need to think about if you're going to, leave it up there running and not just use it as like a portfolio piece that you're just kind of like turning off and on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to, it is its own world. It is its own layer. In fact, with security, it's multiple layers. Using your own tools against your own code is a good start. And that can take care of a lot of stuff. But putting other layers upon it, more advanced scanners or third-party tools definitely will help that as well. I mean, that's the whole part of the concept of defense in depth. There's so many layers, that if something gets past your firewall, it can't get past your encryption. If it gets past that, it can't get past other. So you want to make sure that if any layer gets breached, that the other layers are prepared to handle.
Wow. Yeah.
Any problems. So defense in depth is just so important.
Security within software supply chains has become the major focus for developer and engineering teams. Cloudsmith is a software supply chain management tool that provides public and private Python repository hosting for ultra-fast and secure delivery of your Python packages. Cloudsmith is a fully compatible PyPI-like repository. With Cloudsmith, you have the ability to develop your Python packages internally and privately share them with other teams across your organization. To get started with your own private Python repository, visit cloudsmith.com/sign-up for more information. Lately, we were talking about this before, you've been working a lot more with Amazon Web Services
Mm-hmm.
and automating them. We talked a little bit about, I guess it's Bado. I always wanted to call it Bodo. I don't know why, but it makes sense that it's Bado as like Roboto to automate things. And I had this misconception based on, again, just kind of looking at tutorials and kind of getting introduced to the Python libraries that are out there, that Bado was designed to do stuff with just S3 and buckets and things like that. And then you woke me up pretty quickly. So maybe give me a little background on how you got into using it, and maybe we could talk a little bit about the different uses that you can use that library for.
Yeah, sure. No, so Botto is a great library. There's a guy named Mitch Garnott wrote the original one. I believe he wrote the original, and I think he wrote also Botto 3, which was the successor to Botto. I'm not sure if he wrote the original, but he definitely wrote Botto 3. And then he eventually was working in AWS, and Botto 3 became part of the AWS SDK.
Yeah.
So Python became my friend, and I used it for everything. And when I started becoming, doing more work in the cloud, doing a lot of cloud engineering, Python naturally came along with me. And one of the first things I looked up is, well, how can I use Python? And then when I found the Botto library, I said, great, so what can I do with it? And I've done, everything from generating, security reports or lists of credentials or expired certs to being able to auto-generate SSO credentials locally for users. SSO is a fairly recent addition to AWS, and you can create temporary credentials across multiple accounts. And this, I wrote a script that does it automatically for you. I wrote another script that bridged between two different kinds of systems, between an on-prem and a cloud system, where on one side I had to talk to Kinesis in AWS, the other side I had to talk to Kafka in a build system. So I built a Python script that talked to AWS on one side, on-prem on the other, did a little munging and serialization and encryption of data. And so it acted as the go-between for me, and Botto was really the way to go for accessing all the AWS stuff. So Botto allows me to write these little convenience tools, a lot of which can be done with the AWS command line and, piping output to things like JQ. With Python, you just get so much more power to manipulate the data and be able to store it. Or actually, one of my latest things is to pull usage data from the cloud and then throw it into a Google spreadsheet.
Okay.
And, so I'm using Botto 3 on one side, I'm using the Google modules on the other. And so Botto is just a great bridge. Lets me keep Python in the middle. And I've been using it for years. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, cool. So an SSO that's their secure sign-on?
Yeah, it's a single sign-on. What you do is you sign on with a single set of credentials, and then you have access to cross multiple accounts within a particular organization.
Okay.
And you have different levels of access to those different accounts.
So it looks like a lot of the tools that you're creating there are a bit like managing access or at least monitoring access and setting up credentials and making sure things are configured how you want, which is really cool that it can do that. The tutorials that I was seeing were all kind of geared to this idea of like, let's use AWS, the S3 storage buckets to like save stuff in, to throw things in and create them or remove them. But it even goes further than that, right? It goes into like standing up EC2 instances, the elastic compute, or you mentioned a couple things off as you went along there, like Kafka.
Yeah, Kafka is a streaming service.
Okay, and
it allows you to sort of push data through, and through various channels, and so it's a way to stream larger amounts of data. So Kafka, and then there's which AWS has a managed service for. They've got their own version of streaming called Kinesis, which adds a lot of other kinds of tools on it. So the Botto library lets you connect to lots of different services. You can connect to. S3 is great. SQS, which is like a queuing when you're sending messages. Think of like RabbitMQ or MQ series. Which is actually a great way for building microservices.
Yeah,
so that they can communicate with each other. So yeah, it's most things in AWS you can communicate to via Python. So far, I haven't found anything yet that I haven't been able to.
Yeah, it's all talking.
But I'm sure I will run into something. I'm sure tomorrow I'll find out, oh darn, that the library doesn't have this.
Yeah, and one of the changes with Botto 3 would be it being more geared around Python 3 versus the original. It looked like Like if you just type in Botto, it.
Actually, I believe that was it. Yeah, I don't remember the full history of it.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that might have been there. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, because I was looking at some of the stuff about, like, if I just typed in Botto, it was like Python 2.6 something and then 2.7.3 or what have you, which I was like, oh, okay, cool. It's nice that they're both available if you're, in that kind of code base and need it.
Yeah, and actually, as you were speaking, I just pulled up some of the history of it, and Botto 3 was also refactored to use sort of this base library called Botto Core, which had a lot of the low-level interface stuff, and then Botto 3 sort of sits on top of it and abstracts a lot of it, as one of these articles is telling me. So
yeah, cool. One of the things that we were discussing before we got started was you were also getting pretty deep into testing and are a big proponent of test-driven development.
Yeah.
What's your background with that?
Oh, yeah. Well, when I wanted to get a little bit more advanced with Python, I took an online class through O'Reilly. They had this Python sequence of classes that I did sort of asynchronously with Python instructors.
Okay.
And they were a big believer in test-driven development. So it was Python 3, and for each one of the exercises, I wrote tests before I actually completed the exercise. And that kind of got me started. And I found, because I like the idea of doing unit tests for code, the idea of writing tests before you wrote your code was kind of wacky to me until I started doing it.
Okay.
And I realized that writing your tests out first was a great way to help design things. And I found out as I wrote tests first that I would frequently look at how things were sort of talking to each other, and I realized, wait a minute, I'm doing that wrong. Let me do a little redesign. And rather than having to refactor code, what I did is I actually just changed some tests to fit the design, and then I could actually finally sit down and write my code. A lot of people don't like to do that; they like to get their hands dirty with the code directly, and that's great for things like a proof of concept. But when you're doing a lot of adding features to an existing system, I found that adding a test first, what you do is you add a test that fails, and then you write code to make the failing test pass. That's one of the precepts of TDD.
Huh. I was thinking about like the idea of it being much more applicable or important is with this existing code base as opposed to, say, a one-off experiment kind of situation. Like in an organization, adding the testing to your code and following what you're saying exactly is like, this is what should happen. This is what should be the results. I'm going to test for that. And it fails now because I haven't written it or haven't completed it. And then as I completed it, like I can not only, show to the rest of the organization and the people around me that, this is, the process that it's going to go through. It's interesting to think about. Like I haven't thought about it that way, that being within a group or an organization, how much more important that is.
It really is, because I was working on a group project and I was actually mentoring two more junior people who wanted to really learn Python. So what I did is I actually had them just do some basic online learning on their own, and then I sat down with them and helped them build out a Python project. And I started with them on test-driven development, which the company at the time was talking about doing to help improve code quality and reduce a lot of customer pain that we were seeing from bugs that got out. And they saw it firsthand how they could really envision the application a lot better with the tests there. And in fact, at a certain point, when we were starting to write code, for the tests, we were looking at some of the tests and we said, wait a minute, these tests are testing for the wrong thing. This is not the results that we want. We went back and looked at the spec of the project and said, no, this is not what we wanted. And it's a good thing we didn't go down the rabbit hole of writing out the code for something we were doing wrong.
Wow. Yeah.
That's something that worked for me. It worked for that project. I'm a big advocate of TDD. I don't necessarily, wouldn't want to force it on people who are really good coders and they write quality code and they can sort of visualize it in their head.
Right.
That's great. For me, that experience with them really sort of hit it home for me and for them. Plus the fact that when I made changes to existing features, things that were already coded up.
Right.
And I ran my unit tests. I could find other places in the code base, other things that the thing that I changed depended on that broke.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think, oh, I changed the format of this. I didn't realize this other part of the code. I had forgotten that it required a particular format of the data. So I had to go over there and change that piece as well. Without the unit tests, I wouldn't have known that. There could potentially have been some buggy code out there. Unit tests, yes. Test-driven development depends upon what you like to do. I've just found it so often to just help find design flaws from the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have two things there I'm kind of intrigued by.
Yeah.
One is just that the testing becomes this sort of central, it becomes part of the conversation of, what we're trying to do and how we're going to develop this, and becomes this like really great measure of like, are we meeting the spec of what this thing's going to do, and that can be shown and proven to all the parties there. And then the other is that I had Ricky White on recently. He's a guy who writes a lot of the interviews for Real Python, and we were talking about a recent project that he created, and it was sort of a portfolio piece, this content aggregating tool, and he had added tests to it, and he said that I really think that you should have tests even in your own smaller personal projects, if it's going to be something that's going to be like a portfolio piece that you're going to share with other people. Because when you show that to an organization that you, as an individual on your own individual projects, have added tests, it kind of is this interesting, like additional, like light bulb that turns on, or star or whatever, that says, okay, this person gets, the importance of them, and the basic uses of them. And they don't even have to be complex, but just the idea that you're familiar with them. Has that been an experience yourself, if you were going to bring somebody on a team, if they had tests?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Hearing people talk about testing, even if some of the underlying philosophies on, whether to write test first or test later, the idea of wanting to do testing and wanting to verify your code and verify changes in your code, having at least that base mentality is, for people that I've interviewed, it's been a big plus, because it shows that they want to put out quality work.
Yeah.
And it's certainly helped me when I've had to do coding projects for jobs that I wanted to get. I kind of clinched it at one job, because not only did the Python do what it was supposed to do, but I had unit tests for almost everything. And then I Dockerized it and wrote a make-file. I was a little bit of an overachiever with that particular interview project.
Yeah, that's cool.
But you want to show the care that you put into your work.
Right.
And then you can argue philosophy later.
Yeah. I think I mentioned a couple times on the show, but that was like part of my interview process. Was I was creating projects that were kind of iPad driven, and the idea that I could pull that out of my backpack and show the application running in front of that person, and they could touch it and do some of the basic stuff inside of it was really helpful. So I always like that idea of like projects that don't necessarily have to be, like somebody could run them, on their machine and so forth, which is really kind of unique thing. That's why I like games too, like in the sense that even though the people may not be into video games per se, but like structurally and getting it to a point where it actually completely runs and can show off stuff is kind of a statement to like, completion of your entire work there.
Yeah. Showing a fully finished product, is a big deal for a lot of companies. They want to know that you can finish something. They want to know that you have the skills, but can you use those skills to bring something to a conclusion and get it out to market?
Yeah. This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It covers a topic we've touched on several times recently. Let's say you've created a project, maybe for your own portfolio, but now you need to share it with the greater world. The course is titled Host Your Django Project on Heroku. It's based on an article by Bartosz Jaczynski. And in the course, Bartosz himself takes you through how to sign up for a free Heroku account, use the Heroku CLI command line interface, bootstrap a minimal Django project, integrate Git with Heroku, Then connect to Heroku's PostgreSQL database. Manage configuration, make new releases, and rollbacks. I think learning how to host your projects on a cloud service is a great investment of your time. You spend all that time creating a project, and now you can share it with others. And like most of the video courses on RealPython, the course is broken into easily consumable sections. And for this course, you get a downloadable cheat sheet with commands for not only Heroku and Django, but also some basics for using Vim to edit files in the terminal. And all RealPython courses have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the enhanced search tool on realpython.com. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how you got involved with RealPython. Like, how did you find RealPython initially?
Well, in my early days of Python, I did a lot of online research on how to do things. Even though I had read learning Python, I had taken the class. There was still so much I wanted to learn. So, RealPython was one of several sites that I had been using as a reference. And at the same time, separately, I had seen a lot of stuff from Dan Bader before he was even involved with RealPython. So the two of them sort of separately were part of my go-to resources.
Yeah.
And then when Dan took over RealPython, I was super excited because I knew the quality of work that Dan had, and I loved his YouTube channel. I loved all of his posts. I loved his mailing list, and to see him take over RealPython, that to me sounded like a really good evolution. And it's evolved into something that's really incredibly slick. It's a go-to for me. And when somebody asks me, "Hey, how do you do blah blah in Python?" I say, "Go to RealPython. It's probably there."
Yeah, in a lot of cases, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not everything, but certainly a lot of the fundamentals, a lot of the stuff that's important these days. There's a lot of stuff on pandas and async. I've seen some new stuff now. You guys are working on bringing out stuff up for Fast API, which is sort of the latest slice spread. So you're keeping up with what's going on, and that's important. You break it down really good.
Yeah.
As well. It helped me a lot. I learned about PyEnv from RealPython, and I was able to take what I learned from there and sort of package it into a little recipe for some of the Python devs at a previous job, and made it easy for them to have multiple environments to be able to test their coding.
What kind of I have dabbled with a few of the other environment tools, if you will. What were the things that you liked about PyEnv?
What I liked about it is that I could on demand get a very specific version of Python to work with.
Okay.
And it also you could control the virtual environments as well. I used a combination of PyEnv and Poetry.
Okay.
Poetry I used for all of the dependency management. I had used pipenv for a while, but Poetry, I liked it a little bit better because it was good at installing dependencies, but it was also good at the time at uninstalling unneeded dependencies. And it also did a lot with the virtual environment. And I thought the whole idea of the Pi project TOML file was a great way to define a whole project. So there's great things about that. But PyEnv gave me the base Python to work with before I installed Poetry.
Yeah, nice.
And so it made it really simple. Yeah.
Those are all tools that I'm hoping we're going to do more video course stuff on, to kind of dive a little deeper into, especially the Poetry, which I'm intrigued by, because there were some other previous tools that seem to be, I don't know, kind of flagging as far as their own support. And like you talked about, like how often are people updating them? And this one seems to be pretty strong. Yeah,
Poetry seems to be pretty good. And, so far I've really enjoyed it. I mean, there is, I have been reading lately about, people have been complaining that there's just so many tools out there for managing dependencies and managing your virtual environment. And I can see that. I can see how people get frustrated because they're not sure really what to pick. And I'm hoping over time that a lot of this converges. But you have to be willing to give up tools you're familiar with. pipenv was something I was really familiar with, and I was happy to move to Poetry. I mean, Perl I did for 12 years before I went on to Python. I've been doing Python on and off for the last decade or so. So you have to be really willing to move on and try new things and see what works best for your particular situation.
Yeah, that's been a theme that we've talked about also, just the idea that by using other tools and using especially other languages, you start to appreciate, what's in this language and how it can work, but also, like there's just completely different ways of thinking about how to solve problems. And when it comes down to it, that's really, you mentioned that about the cybersecurity thing.
Yeah.
Here's a group of people that are basically tasked with solving these problems. And when it comes down to the tools, they're not going to be religious about any of them because the situations are in flux, and they need to be able to find what's going to work and get it done as expediently as possible, which I think is kind of an interesting thing. And that's one of the things I like about Python too, is that it allows you to create solutions pretty rapidly, and kind of be able to think on your feet, and the syntax of the language doesn't always get in the way of it, which is nice.
No, it certainly doesn't. The syntax is certainly far more restrictive than I had experienced when I was doing Perl. And I did like the fact that there was a lot less punctuation. It was weird. No, seriously, Python has this, does things with indentation. That was a weird thing for me to get used to. I said, "What? Where are the curly brackets?
Right?
How do you know when things start and end? You indent? That doesn't seem right." And it took some time for me to wrap my head around it, and it worked. And it just looks a lot cleaner, And as opposed to like there was a book that came out about Perl a couple of years ago called Idiomatic Perl, which tried to create this sort of one way of doing things, because Perl was really wonderfully flexible, but in certain cases it was too much though. But I liked that Python was just a lot cleaner.
Yeah, totally. Have you been using the other community portions of RealPython, things like the Slack channels and stuff?
Yeah. So there is I spent some time on Pythonista Cafe, not so much these days. I spent a lot of time on the Slack for a bit. I like. It's nice not to feel in a bubble.
Yeah.
When I'm working on stuff in Python and to see the other kinds of things that people do. It's one thing. It's one thing to read tutorials, and learn about object-oriented programming with cats and dogs and cars. It's another thing.
Right.
It's another thing to solve real problems, and I'm seeing people's real problems within the Slack channel. I'm seeing such a variety of ways that Python can be used. It's just sort of a wonderful gene pool of information from which to gain experience. And I've learned things. I spent time with a few people on the Slack, just helping them with some Botto stuff, because they didn't necessarily have the strongest AWS experience, but they were tasked with doing something in it. And so I helped them, give some of my experience to them. And then just some of the wonderful advanced things I see people doing with what Python can do with object orientation is kind of open up my eyes. So there's just so much out there, and to see people's projects, and to see their successes with it, it's very inspiring to see it. And you always see Dan in there commenting and talking to people, and he has such a wonderful group of people that he's gathered as people who just go along and just help. It's just like it's like our Python guardian angels looking over us.
Yeah, it's a good set of authors and other members of the team that spend quite a bit of time in there and go through and check kind of what's going on. And I think a lot of it is similar to what you were saying, of just this idea of, like, especially with the remote work thing, very often, as a developer alone, you feel in a bubble by yourself often also, but just as a programmer too, like there's these sort of conversations that you aren't having, because you're not in person or what have you. Or maybe if Python is new for you, to have a community just to kind of go hang and just, I lurk through that stuff more than anything, just kind of like, and I find it that inspiring too, like the Friday thing that Dan always likes to do. Like, okay, what do people do this week? I always enjoy kind of scrolling through that and see what people's wins were, and it is encouraging.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. It's encouraging. And one other thing I wanted to mention was that I feel like the real Python community is kind of, it's like a safe space.
Yeah.
Because when you put questions out on various types of forums out there, you don't necessarily know the kind of reaction you're going to get from people.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Hopefully that was a diplomatic way.
No, it was very diplomatic.
Yeah. In the real Python community, you could ask the biggest newbie question, and someone's going to come in and answer it, and they're going to answer it without attitude. And why don't you know that already? Or
right,
stuff like that. And and I know a lot of people who are part of it. There's some language barriers. Everybody's been very patient because you have a global community there of people.
Oh yeah.
So it's nice to just sort of drop in there and know you're going to be among some cool, smart people, and you don't have to feel like you need to walk on eggshells around anybody when you need help.
Yeah, cool.
It's a nice feeling. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have these regular questions that I like to ask everybody, and the first one is, what are you excited about in the world of Python? Again, that could be like an event, a book, package, editor, what have you.
Oh gosh. Well, I like the way Python 3 has been evolving.
Yeah.
Just all of the new features that have been coming out that I just can't keep up with. Which in a way is great, because there's just so many wonderful things that come out. Just the type hinting has been very helpful to me, and I'm looking at I haven't even looked at what Python 3.10 has yet. I'm excited about that. I know you guys just did a write up on that, so I want to take a look at that as well. And it's funny, all the new things that whenever something new comes out in Python, real Python breaks it down quite nicely. But it's just all these new features, all these fun little toys to play with is definitely been very exciting. Just the way the language itself has been evolving.
Yeah.
So, and particular package, I recently discovered something called bolt-ons. There are these extra packages with things like different types of ordered dictionaries and types of caching, just a whole bunch of like kind of random stuff that maybe people thought should have been part of the standard library but wasn't. And I read a whole ton of stuff about the stuff that's everything that's in there, and it's just kind of neat things like, oh yeah, why didn't somebody think of that before? So just throwing a decorator onto a function, and now you've got an LRU cache. Oh, boom, done. Yeah. So, and now as far as what I want to learn next with Python, I mean, everything these days is data science, machine learning, etc. I don't expect to be a data scientist, but I would love to learn a little bit more about analytics. There's and just dealing with numbers. When you're dealing with the cloud, you have to be very careful about resource usage and costs and trends and things like that. And there's some tooling out there, but I'd like to be able to kind of write my own stuff for the particular needs of my company, and understand, well, what's important to them, what's important to the business, what kind of analytics should I generate. I don't really know how to do that. There's so much stuff out there, and just the basics of things like just using pandas, for instance, just to organize the data in a certain way. I'd love to be able to do stuff like that. And along with that, this is sort of not having to do with Python directly, but I'd love to get a little bit better at using databases. I've used SQL Alchemy and ORMs a bit with Python. In fact, my next big project is going to be a much larger tool, and it's going to involve some database work. So I really want to get into that a little bit more. It's been a weakness of mine for some time. Yeah.
I just saw an interview coming up for Talk Python that's with people from SQL Alchemy, and I guess SQL Alchemy 2 is coming or is out.
Oh, great.
So some changes there might be interesting also.
Yeah.
And then to talk about the type hinting, I had this really great conversation, and it should come out just before this episode, with Luciano. He talked about type hinting and the idea that it's sort of this gradual type hinting that's being added to Python kind of across it, keeping that it's dynamic. anyway, we kind of got into this last area, and there's this balancing act of what types can do for you and type hinting can do for you as a business owner that is sort of conversely balanced with testing. Type hinting can't basically, check for rules about your business. Like, it can't, say that, it needs to be a 3-letter string because it's supposed to be an airport code. It can just say that it's a string or not a string. And so testing is something that would take you to that next point. And so it's an interesting sort of balancing act. So it was a great conversation, but I think that that's something that is interesting, that, as much as the proposals are to add more and more type checking and hinting and have those features that allow for kind of really powerful things like you mentioned Fast API and Pydantic and kind of this interesting avenues of like, what kind of data is coming in and going out and stuff like that. Testing is still going to be, a component. So
yeah, it's going to have to be as the industry moves faster, as businesses are competing much more, especially when you have issues in the economy. Your businesses are going to be really competing with each other for what bandwidth they can get.
Yeah.
Making sure that your stuff works is important. You're one bug away from losing half your customers. So
yeah, we hear about those all the time.
Yeah, you really don't want that. You start off with type hinting, and then you have, Pydantic is something I've also been learning as well. So it's just, again, like with security, it's different layers of making sure that your code works. Whether it's unit testing, integration testing, system testing, you gotta check all of that. But these are philosophies that are part of my day to day. I certainly, and one thing I want to emphasize. I've talked about a lot of things that on this episode. I don't claim to know anything or everything. I claim that I have done the work to show that a lot of these things work for my particular use cases and for people who might have a similar use case. When I work with devs in different companies, I show them things, and I'm willing to put in the pain of doing a POC to show it works to help make their lives easier, because I want my devs to spend more time coding and innovating rather than thinking about kind of the environment all around it. And sometimes I suggest stuff and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I emphasize to anybody to really use what's best for your particular use cases and be flexible in changing that.
Yeah. I'm definitely that person who I know many things, but I definitely am always learning, and that's why I love doing the show. Is I get to ask all these questions, and I get to get clarifications of things, and and every person that uses this language has a unique perspective and unique skills and background and so forth. So it's always been a great fun learning experience.
Yeah. No, the podcast definitely. You bring on a lot of really good people. I love listening to people, especially when they help me find out stuff that I've just been doing wrong all along.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I didn't know that. So
yeah. Well, Hugh, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was kind of cool, and it sort of made me think about my past and my choices, and makes me think about what's going to be the next step for me.
Yeah, well,
Well,
I hope Python remains part of that.
Oh, it's not going anywhere. Trust me, it's not.
Okay. Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
All right, thank you.
Remember, security within your software supply chain is crucial for your organization. Visit cloudsmith.com/sign up to build your private Python repository today. I want to thank Hugh Tipping for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python Podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python Podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.